448 half-inch circles in a 31-inch by 31-inch square area. And that's a lot of hand sewing of small individual circles. I'm going to show you how I am going to get around from sewing each individual circle. Here at Quilting Plus More, we're all about bringing your quilts to life so that they can be enjoyed for generations. 28 of these little half-inch circles are in each bunch of grapes, and there are 16 bunches total. There's several ways that I could have sped up the process, and one of them is I could have used raw edge applique. And for those of you that don't know what raw edge applique is, it's basically a piece of fabric that you have cut and you can kind of see the raw edge. I could have done this and placed them on my background and then just stitched like a blanket stitch to hold it on there. Another option is I could have used fusible web to fuse that onto my background and then do a decorative stitch. But for this project, I really wanted that finished edge, that finished look. And to get that look, you have to turn. So I used the Apliquick method to turn all of these little circles. One thing that I did want are some accent grapes in here. I wanted to do some red grapes in there as just kind of to help break it up. And to do that, I made photocopies of the bunches and then just used colored pencils and colored in different locations for the red grapes until I got what I liked. Once I had this all situated, then I take this piece over to my workstation with me and I make 4 bunches at one time, one for each side. So let's head over there and I'll show you how I make them. I have here the Apliquick fusible web, and it's fusible on one side. So as you can kind of see, there's one side that is dull and then one side that is shiny. And what I've done is I have taken a piece of this fusible web, and again you want the shiny side, which is the adhesive side, up. I place that on my design and I used a number 2 pencil and I just traced my design. Now I have this template that I made when I was auditioning and I brought that over. So I'm treating this as one piece versus 28 little pieces. One of the things that I did find when I was starting out is that I couldn't keep these little half-inch circles in place. They kept popping everywhere. So what I do is I just use a washable school glue to help me keep them in place. And the trick is you want some of each circle to be touching the fusible web. So I have this as my guide because as I'm placing these circles, my design is being covered up. So it really helps me to have this really close because then I can see, you know, which grape is overlaying another one. And basically what I do is I literally just work row by row and work down. And one thing too, you know, as I was making all these circles, you know, it is really hard to get all of these perfect. And what I found too is that different fabric kind of ended up turning a little bit differently. And so even some of the funky ones I still keep, because if there's a nice curve on one side, the funky part you can just tuck underneath another one and you'll be good to go. When I laid this out, I put my project on half. This is a non-stick ironing sheet I can just fold over. And before the next step, make sure that you're happy with the layout, because Like this one is a little bit off the sheet, so I'll just kind of see if I can tuck that in just a little bit. There we go. So now what I'm doing is I'm folding this over and I am going to fuse this. Now, when I fuse on this side, I am going to fuse not too long, but just to make sure that, you know, things get fused into place. Because then what I'm going to do is flip this and give it a really good fuse on the back, because I'm going to be closest to the actual sticky part of the fusible web. And then give it a flip. Now this is going to be where you're really going to want to follow the instructions for whatever product you're using to make sure that you do get a good adhesive, you know, bond to all of these pieces. Once they're adhered down, I wouldn't move this at this point in time because that adhesive isn't set yet. So let it cool 100% and then we'll come back. We're all cool now. And so now we're just going to go ahead and peel these off. And there we have it. Now, instead of 28 individual half-inch circles, I have one piece. So now I'll just treat these as one great bunch. And before I go to applique these on, I will trim this extra fusible web away from the edge. And now when I go to sew these on, I am just sewing around the edges that are visible instead of the entire circle. One thing too I didn't point out before is that this mat that I'm using is a soft mat. It's not a hard surface, so it's not smooshing my applique as much as it would if I was doing it on a hard surface. And I also have to say too that it was my mom that came up with this idea. So a huge shout out to Mom. Thank you for this idea. I started basting my grape bunches in place, and to my surprise, my needle ended up with a gummy kind of residue on it. I have used this acid-free washable glue stick in my applique pieces in this quilt up until now with no problem. The difference in this application versus the others was the addition of heat. Remember, I heat set the fusible web to create the little bunches. The gumminess I noticed seems to be isolated to areas where the glue seems to be heavier. Should I fix this? Maybe, yeah, maybe. Will I fix this? The perfectionist in me is screaming to fix it, but will I? No. I, started this project with the intent of using up some of my stash, but also to really learn new techniques and success, because that's what I'm doing. The learning and the mistakes are all part of this quilt story and my story. I want to keep moving forward. I want to keep learning. I want to keep making progress. And, from this experience making these little bunches, there's several takeaways, but definitely less is more when using glue. Now when I finish these pieces and actually sew them down, I'm just going to be showing the edges that are shown. And by just sewing the edges that you see, I think we'll save time. But I also think that by treating them as one piece will help minimize block distortion, because it seems like the more a piece is handled and the more pieces that are added increase that chance. And in this block, there's a lot going on. I talked earlier about the Apliquick method for turning the grapes, and you can check out this video that explains that